The gravel crackled under her boots at 11:47 p.m., and nobody noticed. That's the thing about Lakeshore Road in November. The gas station off the highway, the one with the flickering Petro sign and the hand-lettered Hot Coffee 24 HRS taped crooked to the window. It gets maybe 4 customers an hour on a weeknight. Truckers, night shift nurses, teenagers who drive out there just to have somewhere to drive to. Nobody pays attention to anybody. That's what Mustiel and his crew were counting on. They were wrong. Wren Abara was 31 years old, and she looked younger than that in the dark. That detail matters. She was 5'4", wearing a gray zip-up hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back in a low bun, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She was stopping for gas on her way home from her sister's place in Barrie, which was a 45-minute drive she'd made 100 times. She knew this stretch of the 400 well enough that she didn't even look up at the highway signs anymore. She'd been out of the Joint Task Force 2 for 14 months by then. 14 months of civilian life, civilian clothes, civilian routines. She had a job at a fitness center in North York. She taught early morning classes and went to bed at 10. She cooked. She called her mother on Sundays. She was, by all appearances, a very ordinary young woman living a very ordinary life. Appearances. She pulled up to Pump 3 at 11:44 p.m. She shut off her car, an older Civic that she kept immaculate out of habit, and she sat there for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The parking lot was lit by 2 overhead lights, one of which was doing that slow strobe thing that fluorescents do when they're dying. There were 2 other cars at the pumps, a pickup and a minivan. A man in a high-vis vest was filling the pickup. A woman in scrubs was at the minivan, phone pressed to her ear. Normal Tuesday. Wren got out, tapped her card at the pump, and started filling the tank. She reached into her tote for her water bottle, took a slow drink, looked up at the sky. Clear and cold. Stars visible, which didn't happen often enough in the city. That's when she heard the first truck. It came in fast, too fast for a parking lot, gravel spinning out from the rear tires. It parked at an angle, half blocking the entrance to the station's little convenience store. Dark green lifted, a pair of Canadian flags hanging off the roll bar that had gone gray and frayed from the weather. 4 men got out. Then a second truck pulled in right behind it. 2 more. 6 total. Young, early 20s maybe, all of them loud the way that groups of young men get when they've had a few drinks and they're feeling like they own whatever space they walk into. You know the energy. It precedes them like weather. The woman in the scrubs finished her call, finished pumping her gas, got back in the minivan, and left. The man in the high-vis vest put the nozzle back, glanced over at the trucks, and drove off. Nobody made eye contact, just Wren at Pump 3. She didn't look up. She watched the numbers on the pump, and she cataloged. That's a thing that stays with you after enough years of training. You don't switch it off, not really. The brain just starts doing it automatically, the way a musician hears intervals when other people just hear noise. She wasn't anxious. She was just paying attention. 6. No weapons visible. 2 of them were a little unsteady. The one who got out of the passenger side of the first truck, the one they were all deferring to, the one who was talking the loudest. He was wearing a red jacket with a logo on the chest, something she couldn't quite read. He was maybe 23, broad. He walked like someone who had never once in his life been physically overmatched. She'd seen that walk before. She found it interesting. His name, she would learn later, was Marcus Teal. He worked at his father's auto body shop outside Innisfil, and he drove this stretch of the 400 like it was his personal road. He'd grown up here, and he'd never really grown out of it. That sense that this particular 30-kilometer radius of the world belonged to him and people like him, and that anyone who didn't fit that picture was here on his permission. One of the others spotted Wren first, said something she didn't catch, but she caught the tone. The way a sentence ends lower than it starts, pointed, meant to carry. Marcus looked over. He took his time deciding whether she was worth the walkover. She kept her eyes on the pump numbers. He walked over. "Hey." He stopped about 3 feet from her. Not close enough to be obvious about it. Close enough that she'd have to turn toward him to address him properly, which was the geometry of it. A small physical statement about who was running the interaction. "You all right out here?" Wren glanced at him. "Yep, it's pretty late to be out alone." He said it like a concern. He said it like a favor. She said nothing. "I'm just saying." He looked back at his friends who had migrated closer, spreading out in that casual way that isn't casual at all. It's not the safest stretch of highway. Lot of people pull off here. You'd be surprised. She looked back at the pump. $32 and counting. One of the others, short, wearing a Leafs hat, the kind of person who lets his friends do the talking and contributes laughter, he said something about her car. She caught the last word, which was a slur. The laugh that followed it was quick and sharp. Here's the thing about Wren Abara that nobody standing in that parking lot understood. She was not afraid. She was not frozen. She was completely, quietly calm in a way that would have told anyone with the right experience that they were already in serious trouble. She was still watching the pump, but she had also, without moving, without looking up, already done 3 things. She had confirmed the distance to each of the 6 men, 2 close, 2 mid-range, 2 near the trucks. She had identified the sole object in her immediate reach with any utility, the metal nozzle, which she would not need. She had confirmed that the single working overhead light was behind her, which meant if she turned, they would be slightly lit, and she would not. She had also confirmed, from the timbre of Marcus's voice and the way the group had positioned itself, that this was a performance, that they were performing for each other, and that performances have a particular vulnerability to disruption. "You should move on," she said. It was quiet, not aggressive, not shaky. It was the voice of someone who is telling you the weather. Marcus took a step closer. The distance was deliberate. He wasn't a coward. He was testing. "I didn't ask you anything." The pump clicked off. Full tank. She put the nozzle back, capped her gas, and she turned to face him. Not fast, not aggressive. She just turned and looked at him, the way you look at something you're trying to figure out. "I know," she said. "That's the problem." And then she walked toward the store. Now, if you are Marcus Teal, this is a wrong move on her part. You have 6 people behind you. You are 23 years old, and you have never been spoken to this way by a person who looked like her, who was her size, who was alone, who had every reason to be nervous and wasn't. There is exactly one interpretation of this that your brain will accept, that she is stupid, or that she is bluffing. He followed her. 3 of the others followed him. The remaining 2 drifted toward her car, leaned against it like they were waiting for something. She went inside. The guy behind the counter was maybe 17, acne and a company polo, watching something on his phone with one earbud in. He looked up, looked at the group coming in behind her, looked back at his phone with the particular focus of someone choosing not to see. Wren set her tote on the counter and took out her water bottle, refilling it from the tap by the coffee station in the corner. Marcus had come to stand in the middle of the store, his friends fanning out to either side of him. "You're rude," he said. "You know that? I was being friendly." "You were blocking my car," she said. "Your car." He laughed. Not a real laugh. A laugh for the room. "2 of my boys are keeping it company right now. Don't worry about it." This was the first genuine threat. She filed it. She replaced the cap on her water bottle and turned to face him again. Behind the counter, the 17-year-old had gone very still. "What do you want?" she said. Direct. No fear in it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the kid behind the counter. "Get me a pack of players," he said. The kid moved, relieved to have a task, and Marcus looked back at Wren. "I want you to be a little nicer," he said. "That's it. That's all." This is the moment, if you're watching a movie, where the music changes, where you lean forward. Nothing about Wren changed visibly. Her face, her posture, the set of her shoulders, exactly the same. But something in the air of the room changed, the way it does right before lightning, when the charge builds in the atmosphere and the hair on your arms lifts. The boy behind the counter felt it without knowing what it was. He set the cigarettes on the counter and stepped back. Marcus felt it too, even if he couldn't name it. Something made him take a half step back, just a centimeter, just a tiny recalibration that he probably wasn't even conscious of. His body knew something his brain hadn't caught up with yet. "Here's what's going to happen," Wren said. Her voice was still that same quiet, the same weather report tone. "You're going to ask your friends to step away from my car. Then you're going to leave." Marcus opened his mouth. "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling you what happens next." What followed happened in a space of about 4 minutes. It looked, to the boy behind the counter, who watched it all through his fingers, like a demonstration. Not a brawl. Not a fight in the way that word usually means. More like a geometry problem being solved in real time. The one who moved first was not Marcus. It was the shorter one, the one with the Leafs hat, who came from her left and grabbed her arm. That was the mistake. That was the moment when the encounter changed categories. She broke the grip, rotated, and used his own forward momentum to put him into the shelf of energy drinks. He took the whole rack down with him. The sound was enormous in the small store. Marcus came at her from the front. She stepped inside his reach. The counterintuitive thing, the thing that only works if you understand the geometry of a bigger person's punch. And she did something to his wrist that ended his participation in the evening. He made a sound she hadn't heard from someone that size, and he sat down on the floor. The third one stopped. The fourth one was already at the door. Outside, the two who'd been leaning on her car heard the crash and came running. One of them made it to the door. He saw what was inside and he stopped. The other one ran back to the truck. Wren stood in the middle of the store. Marcus was on the floor holding his wrist, eyes wide with something she had seen many times before. Not pain. Not exactly. More like the cognitive reconfiguration that happens when the world turns out to be structured differently than you thought. The one who'd grabbed her arm was sitting amid the energy drinks, not sure if he was hurt or just in shock. The boy behind the counter was holding his phone. He'd called 911 about 30 seconds into it. Good kid. She walked to the counter, set her water bottle down, and picked up her tote. She looked at Marcus. "Your wrist isn't broken," she said. "Keep it elevated and get ice on it when you get home. Do not get in that truck and drive tonight. You've been drinking." He stared at her. "I mean that," she said. "The wrist is a warning. Driving drunk is a whole other issue." She paid for her water at the tap. She'd used the machine 50 cents, and she went and sat in her car to wait for the police. She turned on the heat. She put on the radio, something low. She was not shaking. She was thinking about her drive home, whether she'd stop in Barrie or push through. She was thinking of her sister, who had made jerk chicken and complained about the property taxes, and laughed that loud laugh that bounced off the kitchen walls. She was thinking about all the ordinary things that make up a life. The OPP arrived in 11 minutes. 2 cruisers, then a third. The arresting officer, a woman named Sergeant Folds, took Wren's statement first, out beside her car in the cold. Folds was efficient, methodical, asked good questions. About halfway through, she stopped writing and just looked at Wren. "What's your background?" she said. "Not hostile. Curious." "I did some time with JTF2, Wren said. Folds looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote it down. Inside the store, 4 of the 6 were waiting for transport. Marcus Teal had, in fact, called his father, who had arrived before the police. A move that turned out to be strategically poor, because his father had also been drinking and made the decision to argue with the first responding officer. So the elder Teal was also spending the night in a cruiser, which says something about the patterns that travel between generations, whether we intend them to or not. The 2 who'd run got about 8 kilometers before one of them, apparently overcome by either conscience or panic, called his mother. His mother called the police. Both were brought in an hour later. 6 for 6. Clean sweep. The boy behind the counter, his name was Theo. Wren had caught it off his name tag, gave a statement that corroborated everything and was, according to Sergeant Folds, detailed enough to be useful in court. He had not, in fact, been watching his phone for most of the encounter. He had been recording it. "You should see it," Folds told Wren, something approaching amusement at the edge of her otherwise flat professionalism. The kid kept it very steady. Wren thought about that. A 17-year-old in a gas station uniform, keeping his phone very steady, while 6 grown men tried to intimidate a woman who turned out to be a joint task force, 2 combative specialists. Keeping it steady because he understood, on some level, that this was something worth recording, that this was something people should see. She drove home at 2 a.m., made it without stopping, the highway mostly empty, just headlights, and the broken white lines of the lane markings pulling her south toward the city. She called her sister from the car, hands-free, and told her what had happened. Her sister was silent for a long time. "Are you okay?" Delia finally asked. "Yeah," Wren said. "Like actually okay, not military okay." Wren laughed. It surprised her. Actually okay. She got home. She fed her cat. She went to sleep. Here's where the story could end, and it would be a fine story. Woman is harassed. Woman can protect herself. Justice is served. The end. There are plenty of videos that end right there. The bad guys are punished. The heroine goes home. Roll credits. But that's not why people kept sharing what happened to Wren Abara. Theo's video went up 6 days later. He'd been sitting on it, he said, not sure what to do with it. His friend from school convinced him to post it. The comments were immediate and loud and covered the full spectrum of humanity, as internet comments tend to. But 2 things were consistent. One was that people wanted to know who she was. The other was what the women were saying in the comments. Comments like the one a woman named Cynthia Kraft wrote, which got more likes than anything else on the thread. "I wouldn't mind knowing how to protect myself." And again, "I wouldn't mind knowing how to protect myself." Wren saw the video on a Thursday morning. Her phone had been going for a day already, with messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, but she hadn't understood why until she saw it. She watched it once. She watched it again. Then she put her phone face down on the kitchen table, and she sat with her coffee, and she thought. She thought about what it had felt like to be 22 years old and starting selection, and not knowing, not yet, what her body was capable of. She thought about the women she had served with, who had operated in every possible environment, without anyone ever writing a headline about them. She thought about Theo's steady camera and what that act of bearing witness actually meant. And she thought about the comment that kept appearing in the thread, over and over in different words but the same voice. Women saying, "I want to be able to do that. I want to know that I could." She wasn't naive. She knew she couldn't make everyone a joint task force 2 specialist. That's not what the comment was actually asking for anyway. The comment wasn't asking for a superpower. It was asking for the thing underneath the superpower, the knowledge that your body belongs to you, that you are not automatically prey, that the world does not automatically get to decide how the interaction ends. She started making calls. The space she found was a unit in a converted warehouse in Scarborough. Hardwood floor, high ceilings, 2 windows overlooking a parking lot. She negotiated the lease herself, and it took 6 weeks. She installed the floor mats. She bought the equipment secondhand where she could. She wrote the curriculum over the course of 2 months, working on it in the evenings, at her kitchen table, with her coffee going cold beside her, her cat on the chair, across from her watching, with that specific blank feline attention that is either approval or indifference. You can never tell. She called it North Ground. North for obvious reasons. Ground because the first thing she teaches, the thing she teaches before anything else, the thing she has every new student write down and read back to her, is what she calls the 3 decisions. Not how to punch, not how to run. The 3 decisions. The first is whether to leave. If you can leave, leave. This is not cowardice. This is the correct answer every single time. The second is whether to wait. Sometimes the threat is not yet committed. Sometimes you have time. Pay attention. Keep paying attention. The third is when there is no leaving and no waiting. When it has become a different situation. When you are the only thing standing between what happens next and what you will not allow to happen. That is the third decision, and that is what we train for. She taught the first class in March. 12 women showed up. One of them drove from Hamilton. 2 were in their 50s. 1 had brought her teenage daughter. She stood in front of them on that hardwood floor, and she said, "You are not here to become someone else. You are here to learn what you already have." By June, there was a waiting list. Now, there is something I want to say to you directly, if you will allow me. There are people who watched Theo's video, and the thing they took from it was anger. Anger at Marcus Teal, at his friends, at the culture that produces young men who think a parking lot at midnight is a place to perform dominance at the expense of a woman alone. That anger is not wrong. It is proportionate. But there is something else in the video, something that I think gets missed if you're only watching for the confrontation, for the part where the bigger story is confirmed. Look at how Wren moves. Not in the fight, before it. Look at how she stands at the pump. How she keeps her eyes on the numbers. How she doesn't perform fear and doesn't perform bravado, just remains exactly herself, exactly present, exactly waiting. She is not ignoring what's happening. She is paying attention to it with her whole body and all of her training, and not 1 ounce of panic. That quality is learnable, not through one class, not through watching a video, but through the long, slow work of learning to trust your own perception, to notice, to measure, to decide instead of react. That is what she is teaching in Scarborough. In a converted warehouse with second-hand mats, and a cat that is not actually hers, but has started coming to the building anyway and sitting in the corner and watching. The 12 women became 40. The 40 became 80, then more, week after week. Different ages, different bodies, different histories, all of them standing on that same floor and writing down the same 3 decisions. Marcus Teal took a plea in April. His friends took various arrangements of community service and probation. His father's separate situation was resolved with a fine and a suspension. These are outcomes, not endings. The difference matters, though it is a larger conversation. Wren was not in the courtroom for any of it. She was teaching a Thursday class. The 7 p.m. session, which had become the most popular, and which she had started co-teaching with a woman named Sergeant Folds, who had retired from the OPP 3 months earlier, and had called Wren out of the blue one day and said, simply, "I'd like to help if you'll have me." Wren had said yes. Of course she'd said yes. On a Tuesday evening in October, the last class before Wren's week off, she taught the 3 decisions for what felt like the 100th time. New students in the front, regulars in the back who had heard it all before, but who came back anyway, because there is something about saying it out loud in a room of people who understand it that is different from knowing it alone. She got to the 3rd decision. She always pauses there, not for drama, just because it deserves the space. When it has become a different situation, when you are the only thing standing between what happens next and what you will not allow to happen. She looked out at the room. Different faces than the first class. Some of them would come back next month. Some of them would drop off after a few weeks, life getting in the way it does. And some of them would carry it, the posture, the attention, the 3 decisions, into a parking lot, a stairwell, a late-night walk home from a friend's place. A moment when the air changes and something in their body says, pay attention. And because they had been here, on this floor, with these mats, with this woman standing in front of them and her former OPP partner at her side, because they had been here, they would. The room was quiet. She looked at them and she said, "Let's begin."